You're listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin in association with Rapha, the fastest clothing in the World Tour, the home of cycling with character. Ride and watch with Rapha in 2019 as they partner EF Education First and Canyon SRAM.
You are listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, brought to you by Skoda. Dedicated to closing the gender gap in cycling, one race, one cyclist at a time. This is our time.
Hello, my name's Richard Moore. I'm with Rose Manley.
Hello.
And Orla Chennaoui.
Hello, hello.
In her attic, by the looks of things. The mad woman in the attic.
Yeah, that's quite appropriate, isn't it? They let me down sometimes.
Nice.
But this is my
beams,
only communication with the outside world, you see, when they lock me up in the attic. It's the reason I do the podcast.
Well, they're going to let you out quite soon to go and cover the Tour de France, Orla.
Far too soon, yeah. Off to Brussels tomorrow.
Yeah, wow. So we're cramming in a July episode of the Cycling Podcast Féminin.
Don't say cramming in, Richard.
Well, cramming in among... We've all got lots to do, haven't we, before we head off for a long period
cramming in
of
an
time.
Extra July episode, because we'll be doing one from La Course, won't we?
Yes.
That's the plan, I think. Yeah, so we've got this extra episode, and we wanted to look ahead to the Giro Rosa, which begins on Friday. Rose, you've interviewed Annemiek van Vleuten, the defending champion and favourite for that. That's really
and podcast fan Annemiek van Vleuten.
I know, incredible.
Hello, Annemiek. She'll be listening.
She was listening in. She was listening to the women's tour coverage while altitude training in Tenerife. She told you, which is great. Just thinking back to what I might have said about Annemiek.
I know that's the danger, isn't it? Though, whenever you learn that somebody's been listening, you're thinking, "I'm quite sure it was all okay, but I might have a listen back just in case."
I mean, not just a great rider, but a great person. And we're also going to hear from Ashleigh Moolman Pasio, who was second in the Giro Rosa last year and is going into it with great hopes again this year. We'll also hear from a couple of women who are riding the route of the Tour de France one day ahead of the men's Tour de France as the part of the Internationals, a group of mainly British women, and they are backed by Skoda, who also, of course, support the Cycling Podcast Féminin. So we'll hear from them in the final part. But what about your news, Orla? Have you got a news roundup?
I do have a news roundup. No racing, obviously, because we podcasted from the last race and we're podcasting ahead of the next race, but there has been plenty happening in the world.
National titles not count as races?
Cycling. They do, but they don't count as World Tour races, obviously. They do count as races, and we will touch on a few of those. There are far too many to go through, unfortunately. But before we get to that, we have had the Women's World Tour calendar announced for 2020. Now, that's due to start earlier than the past few years with the Cadel Evans Great Ocean Road Race. That catchily titled name is now in the top tier of races. So that means that the World Tour will kick off in February next year instead of having to wait to March like we usually do for Strade Bianche. Now, two races notable for their absence from the World Tour calendar: Mechamine Bera and the Prudential Ride London Classic. The London Classic wasn't registered because of a date clash, because they've changed the date for the Olympic Games, so it clashes with the Ladies Tour of Norway. So they say they're disappointed by that. They'll try to get back in next year. Two races that are in the calendar, though, and perhaps surprisingly, given all the news around them: Flèche-Wallonne and Liège-Bastogne-Liège. We thought they would lose their status because they wouldn't comply, we understood, with the new rule that Women's World Tour races must provide live 45-minute coverage. But the UCI say progress has been made. And we were chatting about this before we started recording, weren't we?
Yeah, we were chatting about that. It did say the UCI, in announcing the calendar, said that all the races, including the World Tour, have agreed to meet the criteria, among which include live television coverage. And it's not just those two races, but the Women's Tour and other races as well. Most races do have live TV coverage now, but Women's Tour doesn't. So I'm not really sure how that's going to be resolved, because as far as I understood it, the Women's Tour consider live TV coverage to be beyond them financially at the moment. So I don't know.
Or not necessarily TV coverage, but live streaming, certainly.
Yeah, that could be
is a requirement.
Yeah, that could be the way of getting around. Like, if it's only 45 minutes at the end, obviously, you know, all of those stages when they have like local laps, that can all be quite simply done.
Don't know if you watched the national championships being live streamed at the
God.
weekend.
Yeah, just the gantry looked stunning in the sun, resplendent in the sunshine.
Well, it did illustrate the problems of live streaming in the UK. I mean, it's easier in other parts of the world, it seems, where there's far better 3G, 4G coverage, but in the UK it's very, very difficult.
Yes, we'll have to see whether or not those regulations are going to be strictly adhered to, and what that means for those races. But they're the races that are on the lineup for now. We have other changes coming.
Maybe the women's tour will be 6 stages around the Kent Cycle Park.
Yeah.
Let's hope so, eh? What a thriller that would be. Much as I love the Kent Cyclo Park. But we do have other changes coming next year. The new 2-tier system for teams is being created, of world teams and continental teams. And 3 teams have registered so far for the top tier: FDJ, Nouvelle Aquitaine Futuroscope, WNT Rotor and Ali Cipollini. Now, we know the aim is for 5 top tier teams in the first year. Are those the 3 of the 5 we might have expected? Were there going to be competition for this?
Definitely. I mean, Ali Cipollini is the one that really sticks out to me as the surprise, because they tend to kind of move under the radar a bit. I think FDJ, if you have a men's team, maybe there is a bit more budget there and a bit more ambition to make a bigger team. But they wouldn't have been the ones that I immediately picked out, that's for sure.
Yeah, and you imagine that the likes of Bulls Dolmans, Kangan Schramm, Mitchelton Scott will all want World Tour status too. Although, having said that, what's the incentive to be a World Tour team if there's only 5? You know, it's not. I don't think those teams are going to struggle to get into the biggest races. So,
no. Not
really sure what the UCI is asking a lot of the teams. I don't know what they're getting in return really at the moment.
Yeah, it's a good question, other than to be seen to be helping to professionalise the sport. The aim is to build to 15 teams by 2023, and maybe by then there will be very obvious benefits to the teams who are the top tier compared to the second tier. Who knows? But if there is competition for places, I understand Le Partien has said there can be more than 5 in the first year, as long as they adhere to this strict criteria on things like minimum wage, maternity leave, and a certain ethical standard. So we may have more, but they're the 3 registered so far. While those 3 teams are aiming big, Virtue Cycling is folding due to a lack of sponsorship. That's the team headed by Bjarne Riis. I mean, he'd aimed to build a Danish superpower, really, in the world of cycling. The men's programme, Team WOW, which is racing on the continental level, will continue in 2020, but the women's team is going. And that means that Marta Bastianelli, mid-season, is now having to look for a new team. And she had said that she'd had lots of offers earlier in the season when she was doing incredibly well. She won Flanders, Van Drenthe, Omloop het Hageland. She's now injured. She's had to pull out of the Giro Rosa because of tendinitis. She reckons it's because of being overworked, or her overworking herself. And so now she's in that really horrible position of having to go back possibly to teams whose offers she had originally turned down when she's not in this flying form, because she thought she had a contract until 2020. So sad for her. I'm sure she'll be snapped up in some way or other, but whether it's as favourable as it might have been, probably not. And as you say, plenty of national championships at the weekend as well. Didn't know which way to turn with my head or my fingers on Twitter. Standouts really being the double for Alice Barnes, the 23-year-old taking the individual time trial and the road race in Great Britain. Ruth Winder took the American national jersey off the back of Corin Rivera, who finished second. Annemiek van Vleuten, who we're about to hear from, became the Dutch time trial champion once again, taking the title she last won in 2017. She's now won that 4 times, which is remarkable in itself, but it was the margin by which she won. Over 38 kilometres, she beat Ellen van Dijk by a minute and a half. Van Dijk only getting 14 seconds and Anna van der Breggen. So that's the difference in those time discrepancies. And Lorena Wiebes took the Dutch road race title. And one final bit of news, not the kind of news that we want to be hearing, although I won't make any comment on it, actually, because it is now a legal case. The UCI have opened a formal investigation into allegations of abuse and inappropriate behaviour against the general manager of Health Mate Cycle Live, Patrick van Gansen. You may have all seen, I'm sure everyone has seen the news articles with the 3 riders who left the women's team in the last 12 months, and they lodged formal complaints with the UCI Ethics Committee. Since then, I think it's 10 further riders have come out to corroborate their stories and complain, either giving their names or anonymously, against Van Gansen. He has categorically denied the claims against him. He put a statement on the team's website defending himself, saying that the riders were, and I quote, in one way or another failed to be a member from a UCI team like ours. He said some struggled with more than 12 kilos of excess weight. Others often completely ignored team orders, and still others did not train when it rained a little bit and did not even show up several times when they had to race a course. So he is he's threatening to take legal action against each of them, whose names he knows. And so that process currently underway.
The fastest clothing in the world tour. The home of cycling with character. Ride and watch with Rapha in 2019 as they partner EF Education First and Canyon SRAM.
I think our Rapha bib shorts are one of the most important items of clothing we get. It's the main point of contact with the bike, and you spend hours and hours riding your bike, so you need to be comfortable and have the support that you get from them. Hi, I'm Alice Barnes and I race for Canyon SRAM Racing. I think the Rapha bib shorts are the best in the world.
Thanks very much to our headline sponsor Rapha for their continued sponsorship of the Cycling Podcast Féminin. Very grateful indeed to them. And as I said earlier on, we're looking ahead to the Giro Rosa. We're about to hear from Annemiek van Vleuten, but just briefly on the course this year, it's 10 stages, begins with a team time trial on Friday, 18-kilometre team time trial. It's a very mountainous race. The standout kind of stage is stage 5. It goes over the Gavia, one of the real mythical climbs in Italy. There's a time trial the next day, which, again, very important and could be tough after such a difficult stage. And it finishes with a climb as well, right at the end, stage 10. So the race could be in the balance right till then. Although last year, Annemiek van Vleuten really, she really dominated the time trial. Took a lot of time there. It was a hilly time trial, and on the Zoncolan was the real kind of showpiece mountain stage last year. So those two stages, 5 and 6, over the Gavia, and then the time trial could be the decisive days for the race, and days that will certainly suit Annemiek van Vleuten, who, based on her performance in the Dutch Time Trial Championship, I think goes in as a real outstanding favourite. Anna van der Breggen obviously won the Giro Rosa before a couple of times, but she was well beaten by van Vleuten, which was quite surprising to see. I mean, van der Breggen didn't ride the Giro Rosa last year, so I think it'll be an interesting head-to-head between those two this year.
Yeah, well, something that I found very interesting that I saw from VeloFocus tweeted out, which are the top cycling photographers on the women's peloton. They said that for the last, I think, 4 editions, the winner was third the year before, which is an interesting little fact, which would mean that it was Amanda Spratt's year, which is probably not going to be the case because she'll be riding for Van Vleuten.
I think Amanda Spratt could be a bit of a dark horse, though, couldn't she? Because if everyone is busy concentrating on Annemiek van Vleuten and she and Anna van der Breggen are outmarking each other, Amanda Spratt could actually benefit from that. You never know. She
could, but the time trial could be the stage that proves most decisive. But certainly that team, Mitchelton Scott, looks very, very strong on paper. They were a powerful duo last year, weren't they? Spratt and van Vleuten, and certainly in the climbs, Spratt is very strong indeed. Of the other teams, in Kasia Niewiadoma leads Canyon SRAM, got Marion Vos and Ashleigh Moolman Pasio at CCC Live. Cecilia Uttrup Ludwig, I think, could ride really well. She rode well last year at the Giro Rosa, and she's taken a bit of time out of racing to prepare at altitude and lead Bigla Pro Cycling at the Giro Rosa. I think she could be capable of a strong performance there. Anyone else catch your eye, Rose?
I was just going to mention Ida Marino, because last year she had a stunning performance on the Zoncolan, and I imagine that Movistar will have been they've really been kind of stepping up over the last year, and I imagine they've kind of, by the looks of it, they've got a team that should be working to support her. So it depends how well she does. As you say, Richard, like the time trial's not very long, but it could be, that might be somewhere, if you're not a complete all-rounder, then that might be a bit of a hiccup for some of the riders.
One of the riders that Kasia Niewiadoma at least tipped for a bit of a surprise from her team, Omar Shapira, the Israeli national champion and the newest member of Canyon SRAM. Niewiadoma said that she could be a bit of a surprise. She could shine on the Gavia. She did well at the Tour of California recently, finishing 8th overall. She came 5th on the Queen stage in Mount Baldy. But one thing that Niewiadoma said that I found interesting was that, I mean, she doesn't think she really stands a chance of winning the Giro Rosa. She says that her climbing just isn't of the calibre of Gavia at this stage. Obviously she prefers at this stage in her career the Ardennes, the shorter, punchier climbs. But she did say that if she wanted to win, she would have to take time out from racing and concentrate more on building up to the Giro Rosa. And I just thought that was interesting because of our ongoing debate as to whether you can combine the women's tour, for example, with preparation for the Giro Rosa. And it got me looking at some of the contenders and how many days of racing they've had this year so far. Annemiek van Vleuten has had 17 days of racing. And in those 17 days, she's had 3 wins and 3 additional podiums. Now, she had 21 days of racing in 2018, so her preparation has been even more streamlined than last year. For Anna van der Breggen, she's had 20 days of racing, so 3 more than Annemiek. And she has also had 3 wins, if you count a stage and the overall in California. They're 2 separate. We'll call them separate, will we?
Yeah, I'd say they're separate.
Indecisive, inconclusive, and she's also had 3 additional podiums. So Van Vleuten has done the fewest amount of racing days. Ashleigh Moolman Pasio has had 26 racing days, and Cecilie Uttrup Ludwig has had 20, just the same as Anna van der Breggen. So we are seeing, with the Giro Rosa at least, a more targeted approach like we see with the men's racing from the riders whose teams will allow them to do that, because not every team can afford to allow their riders to take time off whatever races they might have targeted as a team to concentrate on this one.
And actually, Ashleigh Moolman would have done more days racing, wouldn't she, had she not abandoned from the women's tour? So that would have been several more days racing that she would have done.
And that's another part of the problem, I guess, with doing the women's tour. An extra risk racing a stage race so close to the Giro Rosa is you have more chance of crashes in racing, one would assume, than in training. So we'll wait to see how she's recovered from that.
Well, we'll hear from her as well a bit later on. But let's hear now from Annemiek van Vleuten, the defending champion, the favourite, just back from altitude. And you, Rose, caught up with her the other day.
Okay, Annemiek, I should start by saying congratulations for your national TT title, which you got this weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you won it by quite a long way. Was that? Did that give you a good confidence boost that your form is where it needs to be?
Yes, that was the best way to come back from altitude and to get some confidence for Giro. Especially because it was a super flat course, so it was like one way out and back. Usually I like it a bit more technical, so to have then such a TT, the power is there, and then also know that I'm climbing well, so let's bring on Giro.
And how has your preparation been this year? Have you done, I noticed that you did Bira last year, you haven't done it this year. Did you make any changes for the Giro Rosa this year?
No, not really, because last year I also went to altitude and also to Tenerife. It's actually a little bit the same what I did, only now I went last week from Tenerife. I did Tenerife 2 weeks because I spent there so much time already. And then finally when I saw that the weather was nice in Italy, I flew for the last week to Italy. So, which I really enjoyed. It's the best place for me to train.
And I saw that you were recceing some of the stages in Italy. Which ones did you recce and how many times did you do them?
Yeah, that's a secret Swiss short, so I recognize. It's not really a secret, but when I was there, I did recon of the time trial and the Gavia stage, like they're in that area.
And that's got to mean that those are the stages that are going to be the most. The Gavia is of course going to be the most crucial, but you're saying the time trial is also going to be one of the deciding stages of the race.
Yes, but it's not that long, so I think there can be more time differences on the Gavia stage. That will be epic, because we climb from 1,000 meter altitude elevation to 2,600. So that's a crazy amount of climbing in one go. So that round will be really decisive, I think.
And how will that stage compare to stages that you've done before? How will the Gavia compare to the Zoncolan and the Izoard that you've raced before?
It's the Izoard was also on altitude above 2,000 meters, so you get there less oxygen, but will be in favor of girls that can handle that a little bit better, or went to altitude maybe. So Zoncolan was not that high. Yeah, it was super steep, but not that high. And Gavia is not that steep, but it's the highest of all mountains. I think we finished. I think I did Stelvio though in 2010 in the Giro. That was even slightly higher with 2,700. But the Gavia is almost the same. It's 2,600, and you will have, in the last kilometers, you will not have that much oxygen. So it will be interesting. Sometimes you see that girls like Katie Hall that live more on altitude, can deal better with that because they're more used to it.
I mean, you've been pretty much living at altitude in Tenerife all year, pretty much. Have you noticed a lot more riders kind of following your footsteps and staying in altitude for longer and maybe doing less racing?
Yeah, I listened actually to your podcast. You kept me company in the Women's Tour podcast, which was really great. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
It was
every day nice
to listen to. Yeah, I heard that discussion too. And so it's for me, it's I think one of the best stage races, but it's also it's still a second game. So if it stays like that, it's not nothing I want to be there. For the course, so they have to change that. If they put in a time trial, it would make a whole difference. So I also followed a little bit of discussion about how it will look like next year. So if they put in a time trial, it will make difference. Because I think it's a beautiful organized race, and I also loved it to follow it by the podcast because it sounded very exciting. But yeah, I saw now more girls skipping Women's Tour, and also follow a little bit my approach of racing and then do a block of training, and just saw more and more girls go to altitude. But I also think that's also, it's not that they want to copy what I'm doing. I think it's also a sign of the professionalism and in women's cycling, and that's getting more and more professionalism, and that also means you have to focus more on specific races. Where before, I just raced from February till September, and then you were killing yourself. So I think this is just a normal step in development and more professionalism in women's cycling. This
will be your 9th Giro Rosa, and it's your one of your targets of the year. Does it feel differently coming into it as defending champion for the first time?
No, because I don't feel that I have to defend something. I'm just optimal prepared for the Giro, and it's a completely new Giro, new course. So I don't have the feeling I have to defend something. It's just a beautiful race. We're very excited for, and maybe a little bit slightly more relaxed, I think. I know now how it is to win and how to defend, and my team knows it. So when we first started it 3 years ago, in 2017, we were less experienced, and I think now I'm also more confident with my team around me that I got so much experience of defending a jersey for 10 days and how to prepare for such a big stage race.
And you mentioned 2017 there. I mean, how much of a relief was it to win in 2018, having kind of missed out in a bit of a frustrating way in 2017, losing a bit of time on what seemed like an innocuous flat stage back then?
Yeah, that was super stupid. So I learned a lot from that day, that you can't switch off one day in the Giro. So you have to be focused for 10 days. And that's also what's for me sometimes a bit hard. And I think for everyone it's hard. And way more respect for the Grand Tour races from my colleagues in the men's peloton. They have to do it for 21 days. But big relief. I had the signs that I could finish it off in 2017. So it was not a big relief. It was more a lesson, and I learned it the hard way, I guess, to be more focused.
Yeah, tell us about 2018, because 3 stage wins there and Amanda Spratt also on the podium. That seems like a race that was very much in Mitchelson Scott's control the whole time. Was it like that in reality, or?
Yeah, I think we were all never really in trouble, all the time in control. And also it's great to have such teammates around you that are super loyal and we're never in trouble. And I was isolated, so it's good to have some more climbers with you, but also some horsepower with like Sarah Roy and Gracie Elfin last year. A beautiful team effort. I really, if I see the picture still, I still get goosebumps of that team effort.
Is there any particular moment from last year that really stands out, or was it just getting the pink jersey officially right at the end?
No, I think the last day was not my biggest memory of last year. I think I have 3 memories. Also, the time trial where I took so much time difference, but I couldn't believe that I won with so much ahead of Ashleigh Moolman on the uphill. Like, you're always nervous, and to win like that in your rainbow jersey was very special. Because before in the past they always told me that I'm not a climber, and then if you win on such a uphill climb, you know that I changed myself a little bit and turned myself a little bit into more a climber, and it was hard to believe and start to believe in myself that I can do it uphill. So that was a very special win. And also the Zoncolan day, I think my team rode there all day in front for me. We were like, I remember that, the Mitchelson Scott train is coming, the yellow and black, the girls were saying like that, like we're so structured and riding together, and they keep me so much out of trouble until the Zoncolan started. Also, I remember epic weather there, because it was super bad weather just before the Zoncolan. Yeah, and then such a steep climb, and I said before to my DS, like, I really would like, I'm already in the jersey, but I really would like to win there, because it would be so beautiful to win on top of the Zoncolan as a woman. So, yeah, those memories.
And I suppose you're looking for the Mitchelson Scott train to come back this year as well.
Yeah, and I think he's on the full gas, that train, so everyone is really excited. So that also gives me goosebumps, that everyone wants to be now in the Giro team. And before, I think a couple of years ago, the girls didn't want to ride the Giro because there was nothing. Yeah, there was no real goal for them. It was usually or extremely uphill or flat sprint stages. And now it's cool to notice that it's those 6 riders that are selected for the Giro. It's a little bit of fight in our team to get selected for the Giro. So that's a cool feeling.
Chute à l'arrière du peloton. Cycling Podcast team car at the back of the pack, please.
This episode of the Cycling Podcast Féminin is sponsored by The Economist, which of course is the smart guide to the forces impacting your world. The Economist is about far more than just economics and finance. It covers a range of subjects from world politics and business to science, technology, arts, environment and sport. It helps readers prepare for what is going on in the world around them. It sifts through the noise, focusing on the essential information that tells the real story at a time when facts matter more than ever. It's been a trusted source of intelligence for over 170 years, and The Economist is for the kind of person who never stops asking questions and wants to know why the world is the way it is. You can, as a listener to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, get a free print copy of The Economist. I'll give you details of that in a moment. But Orla and Rose, I set you the challenge of finding an article in The Economist.
It's not a challenge, Richard.
It's not a challenge.
It's a pleasure.
It's a privilege.
Yes, it is.
I set you the privilege of... don't know that works. But anyway, you both picked an article that I think is quite relevant to a lot of the things we talk about.
It's a brilliant article, actually, so timely. It's about the pay disparity between the men's and the women's soccer teams, football teams in America. Because the American football team, who are currently in the final, sorry, all England fans of the World Cup, are currently taking action under the Equal Pay Act and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. They're saying that they're engaging in substantially equal work as the men's team, but they're paid considerably less. Now, the women would receive, if each of the teams were to play 20 friendlies over the course of a year and win them all, the women would receive $99,000. The men would receive $263,320. Now, the reason that this is so interesting, I think, is because we hear the same old arguments time and time again when it comes to pay discrepancy in elite sport in particular. And the argument is always that either the women don't do as much as the men, or they don't get the same audience figures. And with the American football teams, as in the football teams of America, that is simply not the case, because a Wall Street Journal investigation into audited financial reports found that between 2016 and 2018, women's games generated about $50.8 million in revenue. The men took in about $49.9 million. Almost the same, but not quite. So the women are actually generating more revenue than the men and not getting as much money. So this case, as a test case for sport across the board, I think will be absolutely fascinating. And just because of the profile that a win at the World Cup would bring internationally to this story, I'm now actually going for America to win. Even though the Dutch are in the semi-finals and really I'd love a party here, I think I'm actually going to be cheering on the USA.
Principles over parties, Orla.
I have never, ever approached life in that way. Never. Oh, I'm getting old, aren't I?
But I think that's the thing with the article. To me, it just smacks of, moving the goalpost, not to use like the worst pun, most obvious pun I could have used, but it is because it's like, well, if you only, I always say with women's sport across the board, if you only got the number of audience figures, the number of endorsements as the men do, then you'd be paid the same. That's all you need to do. And you think, okay, let's set about trying to do that. Let's try and boost our exposure, try and boost our business associations. And then it just goes to prove that you can do all that and still be paid less.
And when you compare the two teams, the USA, the most successful team in women's footballing history, the men, who are on more money than them, their best result has been third place in which World Cup?
1930.
You read the article, Rose. Well done. And they failed to even qualify last time around. I'm sorry, yes. Total BS, as Francois would say with less abbreviation.
Well, that article is headlined "Better Play, Lesser Pay," and that's in the recent edition of The Economist. If you'd like a free print copy of The Economist, just text the word bikes, BIKES, to 78070. That's bikes to 78070 for a free print copy of The Economist. Well, we heard before the break there from Annemiek van Vleuten. I think what struck me most, Rose, I don't know if this was your impression speaking to her, but she sounds very relaxed, and I think she's not in the first flush of youth. Yeah, in sporting terms, I mean, she's 36 now, and yet she sounds and rides like somebody who's really figured it out and worked out what works for her, and she seems not only sort of performing really well on the bike, but kind of content off it, and she seems to like this life that she leads of spending a long time at altitude, training really hard. She posts on social media some of the rides she does. We'll hear from Ashleigh Moolman Pasio later on, who thinks that Annemiek van Vleuten is the most dedicated rider in the women's sport. And it seems to me that she has just she's figured it out. And there was an interview I read the other day with her in Cyclist magazine, actually, where she talked about Tokyo being a big motivation for her, that what happened in Rio has left her with this motivation to kind of, she doesn't dwell on that at all, but you get the sense that she's really focused on Tokyo in particular and getting an Olympic gold medal.
Since you mentioned her age, isn't that a natural consequence of her age? The fact that you say that she's got it figured out, that she is more confident, that she's found whatever balance she needs between training and winning and lifestyle and all the rest of it. It would seem that if a sport can allow you to benefit from experience rather than it go against you, then so much the better. And that seems to be the case with her, certainly.
I think also, the Giro Rosa is 10 stages, and the women's tour was 6 stages, but has only been 6 stages this year. Giro Rosa has always been the longest race that is still running, and I think that it takes a bit of time to get into the rhythm of the Giro Rosa as well, and being able to know about how to preserve some energy. She said when I spoke to her about 2017, when it all went a bit wrong, when there was crosswinds on a very innocuous flat stage, and she lost, I think, almost several minutes on that stage just because her team, Mitchelton Scott, or Orla Scott as it was at the time, wasn't aware that they had to keep her at the front even on those days when it shouldn't have been a GC day. So I think also it's about the team being experienced, and she's got 4 of the riders this year lining up for Mitchelton Scott are the same as last year when they won, and that is with a team that is only 6 riders now instead of 7 riders, because the UCI have reduced the teams this year for these stage races. So I think she's got it. Not only she's got it worked out, but I think Mitchelton Scott have got it worked out as well.
I think also what came across in your interview, Rose, is her confidence as a climber. And again, she spoke about this in this other interview too, where her takeaway from Rio was not that she crashed and lost a potential gold medal, but that race proved to her that she was one of the best climbers in the world. And I think she took from that this confidence that when it comes to the mountains, she is the rider to beat. And again, it took her a long time maybe to figure that out, but that confidence has sort of given her wings in the mountains. And she probably looks at the course for the Giro Rosa this year and thinks that suits me down to the ground. You know, nobody can beat me on that. Yeah,
it's amazing, really, because I remember speaking to her a couple of years ago, doing a feature about the Mer de Huy and Flèche Wallonne, and you know, she had done well one year in the past then, and I remember talking to her about it and her saying, yeah, it's funny that I did so well on it because it really doesn't suit me, you know, climbing is really not my thing. And now thinking about that comment now, it just seems completely ridiculous, because when you think about the best climber in the peloton, you immediately think of Annemiek van Vleuten.
Well, shall we hear now from another great climber, Ashleigh Moolman Pasio, who was second in the Giro last year. And as you mentioned, Rose, she crashed out the women's tour, so her preparation has been disrupted a bit. She's okay after that, no ill effects, but it did disrupt her build-up to the race. But she's interesting on looking ahead to this race, but also on where the Giro Rosa sits in the women's calendar. Because she wrote a chapter for our book, the Cycling Podcast book, a couple of years ago, about how the Giro Rosa was sort of not as prestigious a race as it should be as the sort of premier women's stage race in the world, and the women's tour, she reckoned at that time, was overtaking it. But she's maybe got a slightly different view now, and here's what she had to say.
I think this year is kind of a less predictable Giro as such. It's sort of similar in that we have that pure finish and uphill time trial midway, and then second last stage is also quite a big climbing day. But there are a lot of hard stages in between, you know, and probably slightly less predictable stages, because it's not necessarily just finishing with one big uphill, you know, it's a couple of climbs in the day. So I think it's a kind of less predictable Giro. I think it's going to be a Giro where, you know, you have to race smartly, save energy in the beginning, but at the same time, the race could kind of be decided on any one day. Of course, the time trial and the Gavia stage and the second last really big uphill stage are going to be very important days, but there's plenty of important days. So it's going to be one of those tours where, you know, you have to pay attention every day and just, you know, be ready every day to fight for the GC.
A lot of riders obviously missed the women's tour. I'm thinking of Anna van der Breggen, Annemiek van Vleuten, Cecilie Ludwig. They were all altitude training for the Giro, and it seems that this is the, you know, women's cycling going very much the way of men's cycling, where the training is as important as the racing. And you know, there are riders who will take big chunks of the season out of racing in order to train. What do you think about that trend and the importance of having those blocks of altitude training before your big targets?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are various ways in which you can go about it in the year. Of course, I definitely believe that it is important to have sort of big training blocks, and I also believe in altitude because it is something that I definitely, you know, incorporate into my training. So it just kind of depends how you plan your year, really. So, you know, in my case, I suppose, like last year, for example, I didn't race the women's tour, and I did similar to what the likes of Annemiek and Sile and Amanda have done this year, did a big block of training in June and went to the Giro with very little racing, and it worked very well. But this year, I suppose, when the course was released regarding the women's tour, it was kind of a good opportunity, I decided to use it as part of my preparation for the Giro, so to use it as a high-intensity block. So it kind of all depends. I do believe that nowadays we do have to be a little bit more selective in our races, because, gone are the days where you can do every single World Tour race, just because the racing is that much more demanding. Nowadays, the stages are longer, the depth, there's so much more depth in the competition, so the racing takes that much more out of you, both physically and mentally. So it is important to have those periods away from racing where you can focus on training and refresh your mind and be ready for the next race. So I believe in that, but it also kind of depends how you plan out your year. You also see, for example, the Tour de France riders who would use the Dauphiné as pre-race, to get things ready for the Tour. So I see the women's Tour could be used in that way, and that was my intention this year. But then, of course, there's always the risk. Like, look, Chris Froome, he's totally messed up from his crash at Dauphiné, and in my case there was also that risk that Giro could have been affected by the crash at the Women's Tour.
Van Vleuten obviously very dominant last year in the Giro. You'll have seen the results of the Netherlands Time Trial Championship, a pretty convincing win for her there. She's obviously in great form again. Is she the rider you think that she's the one to beat this year again? Yeah,
Annemiek has certainly, taken huge steps up, in the past 2 years. She's definitely one of the best climbers in the peloton at the moment. She's also one of the most dedicated, sort of single-minded people in terms of, she puts absolutely everything into cycling, and it works for her. But I definitely do feel that, of course, she's going to be the one to watch. She's there defending her title. She's definitely very motivated. She's going to come from high of obviously success at her national championships. I look at sort of Middleton Scott being the team who really has the responsibility to control and to make the racing. And it's up to them to defend, because it's their race to lose.
And just finally, I wanted to ask you, a couple of years ago, you wrote an excellent chapter for our book about the Giro Rosa and where it stood. I get the sense over the last couple of years that its status has gone up, and it could be because the best riders are targeting it to such an extent. Is that a feeling that you have as well, that the prestige of the race has increased a bit over the last couple of years and coverage has increased a bit as well?
Yeah, well, I suppose when I wrote the chapter for your book, I really had the feeling that the Giro was just taking their sort of reputational status for granted, because it was the longest stage race on the women's calendar. It automatically got the sort of Grand Tour status, but that they weren't necessarily putting in the work to kind of match that in terms of exposure and drawing crowds and spectators to the race. I definitely do feel that there has been a change and that there is an improvement, with regards to, for example, last year, they definitely gave us the same Zoncolan finish, and the stages were tough, and that's kind of made it Grand Tour. But I do still believe that there's a long way to go in terms of the full package. So of course the challenge of the race is there in terms of World Tour status. Of course the prestige is there in terms of the riders that are competing for the title, but there is still a way to go in terms of exposure and drawing in the crowds. It always feels kind of, it's a catch-22, obviously we go to the Giro, we put so much into it. You see a lot of riders who take 5-6 weeks out of racing to prepare for the Giro, and then you go and you race these really tough stages and nobody's really watching, Now, thankfully, obviously we have an hour coverage, which we also had last year, as an update highlights package after every stage, and thanks to Vox Women and Trek for making that happen this year. But again, it's not live, and so the full story of the race is not really being told. So there's still a way to go. But this year, another step forward in terms of the Giro is that they actually have a title sponsor, which they haven't had in the past years. So it's just good to see that there is some change happening from year to year. But of course, it is slower than what we would really like. We need more live coverage, and there's just not enough consistency. So beginning of this year was really amazing. In the beginning part of the year, especially with the Flanders Classics, did such a fantastic job of live Facebook streaming. We had races like Binder doing live streaming coverage, of the race, and I got such great feedback, and we had amazing momentum from that. People were really becoming engaged in the story of women's cycling, and they were seeing the story of each race, and the lead outs and the sacrifices and the crashes and the drama, and then you go from that great momentum to no exposure in the Ardennes Classic Week, and it's amazing how much that sets you back again. So you've just built up this nice momentum and a great following, and then suddenly it becomes hard to find the racing, and maybe 20% of the audience, which is now new audience that you've just managed to kind of engage in the racing, you lose them. Like, how do you find the motivation, I suppose, as a rider to go out there and potentially sacrifice a result on paper by doing a really bold move if no one's going to see it?
The Cycling Podcast Féminin is supported by Science in Sport. Science in Sport, fueled by science.
Thank you very much to Science in Sport for supporting the Cycling Podcast Féminin. You can get 25% off all your Science in Sport products at scienceinsport.com with the code
SISCP25. SISCP25. CP25. CP25. SISCP25. I wish our listeners could see Rose right now. She's literally got her hand in the air, pumping at the air like she's in the football grounds. I can't listen to the code on the regular podcast without singing it to myself.
That was very hard as well, because we were on a bit of a delay, aren't we, Orla?
It transports me back to Blenheim Palace and Wales and other places on the women's tour.
Nice little nostalgic
very
trip.
Very evocative. But yeah, Science and Sport, thank you very much indeed to them for their support, their continued support. And we heard from Ashleigh Moolman Pasio. I was interested in what she said about the Giro Rosa and its standing, I suppose. Because she did seem quite down on it a couple of years ago. She was fed up with, well, I've got the book in front of me here. She said, no longer, she wrote at the time, no longer did I think it was okay for the most prestigious tour to serve us plain pasta every meal. No longer did I think it was okay to jam riders into cars for upwards of 4-hour transfers between stages. No longer did I think it was okay to sleep in dormitories or dirty old hotels. No race results published, no coverage of any kind, laughable prize money, disproportionate UCI points. A lot of things had sort of caused her to fall out of love with the Giro Rosa. What seems to have happened is that they have upped their game a little bit as a race. The stages are more prestigious. Doing climbs like Zoncolan, Gavia puts it on a sort of different footing. But equally, I think, there's more coverage. There's some TV coverage this year. And there's also, there's been TV coverage before, but there's English language TV coverage this year. And I think also just the fact that the top riders in the world are making it their focus and really targeting it. I think a few years ago, maybe there was a drift towards the women's tour and away from the Giro Rosa, whereas I think because of the nature of the race, the course in particular, it does draw out and attract the best riders in the world.
I think it is the course that has made the biggest difference as well, because when I look back at some previous editions, they all kind of had that... almost like the men's Giro d'Italia this year, where it was just flat, and then the last three stages, then you'd have some bumps and lumps, and the result will be made then. But looking at this year's course, you can see that there's two summit finishes, stage 5 and stage 9, and there's also on the last stage, it's kind of a hilltop finish again. There's a time trial, there's a team time trial. So it's a lot more varied. It's a lot more exciting from the start. There'll be so many more battles going. There'll be a GC battle on. There'll be the stage battle. There'll be the jerseys battles. There's a lot more going on right from the off than there ever used to be.
And we can never underplay the importance of the broadcast coverage as well, as you said, Richard, because coming as it does with the unfortunate calendar clash with the Tour de France, when really all eyes that could be focused on cycling are in the Tour de France, and that's not just cycling fans, that's the wider sporting world who tune into cycling once a year and whose radar sort of sweeps across the sport once a year, and that's just for the Tour de France. You need to be able to watch, and I'm speaking very selfishly from an English speaking point of view, you need to be able to watch those highlights at the end of the day when you finish the Tour de France, and you can catch up on what's happened during the day. And Trek really need to be applauded for putting their money where their ambitions are and funding the daily highlights programme for this year.
What I would say on that, though, is that there was an hour's highlights last year. So that what they're doing is not actually creating more coverage. All it is they're taking that same coverage and having an English voice on it.
But it is being done as a live highlights programme. So it's not just being packaged up and being put out at a random time. Rebecca Charlton will be presenting those highlights live, whether that's streaming or whatever, and that will be going out live. And we know that the production values of a live presented programme tend to be a lot higher than they would be if you were just putting out the highlights on YouTube, for example. So they have put money into that, at least. And I'm hoping that'll make a big difference. I'm hoping that'll make a big difference to me, even in terms of when we're at the Tour de France, thinking, now I can catch up on that. Because otherwise you're trying to just catch up on social media or on news articles, and it just doesn't pierce through your consciousness in quite the same way. And we're the ones who are incredibly interested in it. So if we can see a difference this year, I think that'll be encouraging for sure.
I'm looking forward to it, to watching it, and as you say, Orla, when you're just keeping up with the results, it doesn't have anything. It doesn't soak in to anything like the same extent. It's just words on a screen, and to really understand what's happened in the race, you need to be able to watch it, and so I'm looking forward to that. I should say as well that we're hoping to bring better coverage of it in our own way. We've got Lizzie Banks, who was a joint winner of Pédaleuse de Charme at the Women's Tour, wasn't she? Lizzie Banks of Bigla is going to be keeping an audio diary for us at the Giro Rosa. I think, well, judging by her interviews at the Women's Tour, they'll be really good because she's very lively. She's still quite new to cycling. I had a chat with her the other day. She's riding the National Road Race and, just spoke about the difficulty of riding that as a single rider without any teammates, when you had the Barnes sisters, able to take it in turns to follow moves and so on. And I the tactical side of it is something she's probably still learning about, but really understands. And I think she'll be riding with Cecilia Ludwig at the Giro Rosa, and I think hopefully will offer a great insight into her race and the wider race as well. So that'll be available to friends of the podcast sometime after the Giro Rosa. We'll also play an extract in the next monthly episode of the Cycling Podcast Féminin, so listen out for that. Before we go this month, we're going to hear from the Internationals. Now, they're being supported by Skoda, who are also supporting us, of course, to ride the Tour de France a day ahead of the men's Tour de France. So I met a couple of them recently, Louise Gibson and Helen Sharp. Really interesting stories they both have about how they got into cycling, what they do now. And, they're doing it as a personal challenge, but there is a political dimension as well to the increasing numbers of women, of groups of women riding the Tour de France, to show that they can physically do the distance, that's not an argument for not having a women's Tour de France. But, I think primarily for a lot of them, it's about a personal challenge and about an incredible experience. And I have to say, in a lot of ways, they have it much tougher than the men, because not only are they riding in a much smaller group, but the logistics, they have some help, but they have to manage a lot of them themselves and, cook dinner and look after themselves in that respect. So a really difficult 3 weeks ahead of them. I met them recently in Richmond Park Helen Sharp and Louise Gibson. Here they are now.
You're listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, brought to you by Skoda, dedicated to closing the gender gap in cycling, one race, one cyclist at a time. This is our time.
So I'm Louise Gibson. I started cycling probably about 5 years ago. I used to be a runner, not very good runner, but run for fun and did marathons, stuff like that, but just kept getting injured. So much so that I had to stop running and have surgery on my hip. I had hip impingement surgery with Marcus Banks, and he actually recommended that I never run again and take up cycling. So I did reluctantly. I wasn't very good. I was just kind of, going out on a bike to try and keep fit. And then did a couple of sportives and just seemed to be keeping up with whole packs of good riders. So then just started taking it a bit more seriously.
So Helen Sharp, similar to Louise, actually was a runner before a cyclist. So I actually took up spinning, indoor cycling, increasingly spent most of my evenings and mornings indoors looking at an instructor and a wall, and actually through a guy that I met at spinning, he kind of was like, look, why don't you just buy a bike? You can actually go somewhere rather than just pedalling away furiously.
So I've been linked in with Skoda for a couple of years now and do Ride London with them each year, and it was through their social media last year that I heard about the French team that have been doing this ride for this is their 5th year of doing it. They opened up applications towards the end of last year, but wanted to keep their team French. But they've done an international opportunity for a bunch of us to get together and create our own team, which is what we did. So 10 of us got together to create a team to ride with the French girls, and that's how it came about, really.
So we're 23 riders in total, 13 of the French team and 10 of us. But each day there's an opportunity for others to join certain stages. But in terms of riding as a fairly small, tight group, we're going to be, there's lots of comments about hide in the wheels and don't take your turn on the front. And it's kind of like, well, there's only 10 of us, so there's only so much that everyone can do that. We're starting at 8:30 every morning. Often that involves driving to where we're going to be starting. And over the weekend, we were kind of told that a really good day will finish by 6 p.m. A bad day, we might still be out on the road at 10 p.m. We're self-funding what we're doing and looking after ourselves. So that then means coming home, cooking dinner, having a shower, trying to stretch. I think we're talking 5-6 hours.
We've got a few nights, so we've booked into restaurants and stuff, but I think we've got about 7 where we're having to cook for ourselves, and we're just going. I think we want to do 2 shifts. So the first lot go and shower while the rest prepare some food. But our crew that are coming with us aren't there to cook for us or do any of that stuff. They're literally there to help us with driving the support car, and one guy's a mechanic, so we don't have cooks with us, or we don't even have a massage person. I think that's going to be a tough thing, so we've just got to do everything ourselves. So even more daunting than the actual riding is just, I think, how tired we're going to get, because we're probably only going to have maybe 5 or 6 hours sleep each day with up to 10 hours riding, which is just massive.
It's not just, I think we've moved well beyond proving that women can do things. I think, even this kind of movement started out that way and quickly, just progressed from that. We're all doing it because we want to, make a difference. We're all doing it to kind of challenge ourselves individually, but also the perception or the boundaries that other people kind of impose on you. I've got a 2-year-old, I don't have my own kids, I've got a 2-year-old niece, and it's kind of like, if she wanted to be a professional cyclist when she's older, she should have that opportunity. Hopefully we'll make a bit of a difference at least.
I just like to inspire other women and make cycling accessible to, I think, some of my friends, because I was never a cyclist or even particularly sporty as a kid and stuff. I suppose people have seen me go from just being a mum a few years ago to now getting really into cycling and doing this, and that they know that they can do it too. And just to give people that belief in themselves and their bodies,